Hi, Black Cat Recapped here. Today I am going to explain a mystery movie named Don't Worry Darling. In the 1950s, there is a town called Victory near the desert in California. The people who live there are happy families and their lives are perfect. Every morning, the husbands go to work at a place called Victory headquarters outside of town. The wives stay at home taking care of the house and learning ballet from their teacher Shelley. The wives are not allowed to ask questions about their husband's work, and they are not allowed to visit the headquarters. One of the happy couples in the town is Alice and Jack. They have a very active and close relationship, and they enjoy hosting parties for their neighbors, especially Alice's best friend Bunny and her husband. Alice and Jack have a favorite song that Alice likes to sing when she does her chores. Sometimes, the whole town shakes for a few seconds, and Alice wonders if it has something to do with the projects at Victory. But Jack refuses to answer and Alice is okay with letting it go. One afternoon, after their ballet class, Bunny and Alice see a group of men wearing red jumpsuits helping a new neighbor move in. They gossip about their friend Margaret not attending class, but that's not surprising because Margaret has become an outcast in the town after a mysterious incident. Later, when Alice is in her garden, she suddenly notices something. Margaret is standing in her backyard, holding a toy plane in her hands and closing her eyes because she seems to be seeing a strange vision of open eyes in the darkness. Alice doesn't understand what's happening and ignores it. While preparing dinner, Alice finds that all the eggs in her carton are strangely empty. A few days later, Alice is at a pool party at Shelley's house. As the melody plays in her mind, strange images appear in front of Alice. She forgets about them when Bunny distracts her. The party is briefly paused by Shelley and her husband Frank, who is the CEO of Victory, to give a speech welcoming the new neighbors to the town. Suddenly, Margaret interrupts the speech, questioning why the new neighbors are here when they shouldn't be. Her husband takes her away, but the atmosphere becomes uncomfortable. Frank takes over the conversation to remind everyone that they are here to build a small town based on safety and order, with the goal of changing the world. Afterward, Alice remains worried about Margaret and goes to look for her. She finds Margaret in her house, receiving some kind of medicine from her husband. Margaret tries to tell Alice that she's not okay and that she's been having nightmares. Alice goes back to the party and finds Jack in Frank's room, fixing his tie. To her surprise, Jack starts getting intimate with her right there. The next day, Alice and her friends are shopping when they talk about Margaret. They mention how she's been acting strangely since the incident, but Bunny interrupts and reminds them it wasn't an accident. Margaret broke the only rule they had and took her child into the desert because she saw something, possibly a hallucination. When they found her, she was alone with her son's toy plane, and they never found the child, although Margaret claims they took him away as punishment. One of them wonders if the rumors of the men developing weapons are true, but Bunny stops her and reminds everyone that the wives' only job is to support their husbands and not ask questions. Later at night, Alice has very strange dreams, and she can't stop thinking about them the next day. She decides she needs some fresh air and takes the trolley, but instead of getting off at the mall, she stays on to enjoy the view of the desert, which the driver finds odd. Suddenly, a plane that looks like Margaret's toy plane appears in the sky and crashes in the middle of the desert, and Alice wants to investigate. However, the bus driver refuses to take her there because it goes against the rules. Despite this, Alice breaks the rules and walks deep into the desert until she comes across a hill with a spiral road around it. She makes an effort to climb all the way up until she finds a mysterious dome and calls for help, but nobody responds. She slowly walks towards the dome until she gathers the courage to touch the glass walls. Suddenly, her body shakes, and disturbing images flash before her eyes while Frank's voice talks about leaving chaos behind. When Alice finally blinks again, she finds herself back in her bed at home. Confused and frightened, she goes to the kitchen and discovers Jack trying to cook quietly so as not to wake her. It turns out Alice had already returned home when Jack arrived, but she can't remember how. She mentions the plane crash, only for Jack to inform her that there hasn't been any crash, otherwise everyone in town would be talking about it. Alice becomes upset and dismisses it all as bad dreams. The next day, while cleaning the windows as usual, the wall behind Alice starts moving and pushes her against the glass. the wall returns to its place because it was only a hallucination. Just then, the phone rings, and Margaret is on the other end, asking Alice if she saw it. The conversation stays on Alice's mind, and during her ballet class, she is shocked to see her reflection transform into Margaret, causing Alice to panic and yell. Nobody else in the room understands what she's reacting to, and when Alice turns around, Margaret is gone. Worried about the meaning behind this, Alice hurries back home and finds Margaret standing on top of her house. Alice tearfully shouts at her, trying to make her stop, but Margaret ignores her and ends everything. Alice panics once again and tries to reach Margaret, but the men in red appear and drag her away after just 2 steps. In the evening, Alice tries to tell Jack what happened, but he doesn't believe her because Margaret's husband is at the hospital with her, telling everyone that it was just an accident while she was cleaning the windows. Alice hates being treated as if she's crazy and demands to know the truth. She asks Jack about his job and what the company is hiding from everyone until he finally loses his temper. He yells at her, warning that answering those questions could jeopardize their wonderful life together. Alice is disturbed and finds it difficult to go back to sleep. She watches TV, which triggers a new hallucination where she feels like she's drowning in a pool. But before she can understand its meaning, she blinks and finds herself standing against the window as if she had tried to escape. Moments later, Jack brings Dr. Collins for a checkup. The doctor believes that Alice's stress from witnessing Margaret's fall is causing her current condition. When Alice tries to explain what really happened, Collins attributes it to the mind sometimes distorting reality due to overwhelming grief. In that moment, Alice notices that Collins has classified files about Margaret in his briefcase, which prompts her to inquire about Margaret's situation. Collins explains that Margaret had frequent outbursts and paranoia, which made it difficult for her husband to work peacefully. He was fired from Victory, and Margaret was sent elsewhere to receive the necessary help. After the conversation, Collins leaves the house but accidentally forgets his briefcase. As soon as he and Jack are gone, Alice seizes the opportunity to search for clues in the briefcase. However, she is interrupted when Collins returns upon realizing his mistake. Once Collins has left for good, it is revealed that Alice managed to steal Margaret's files. However, all the pages in the files have been blacked out, rendering them useless. Margaret decides to burn the files in the fireplace while reflecting on her actions and trying to silence her guilt by drinking whiskey. Later in the evening, they attend a fancy party organized by Frank at a restaurant. Frank keeps watching Alice while conversing with Collins in a corner, which unsettles her. As Alice begins to spiral into a breakdown, a dancer appears in the room and performs a show that reminds Alice of her visions. Overwhelmed, Alice asks Jack to take her home, but he ignores her because Frank takes the stage to make a significant announcement. To everyone's surprise, Frank calls Jack to join him and announces that he is getting a promotion. The crowd starts celebrating, but this final event pushes Alice into a complete breakdown. She runs to the bathroom, where she sees the vision of the couple again. Bunny suddenly arrives to check on Alice, and when Alice tries to explain everything, Bunny cuts her off and scolds her for breaking the rules. So she tells Alice to pull herself together and be a good wife. Alice has no choice but to go back to their usual routine and try to forget about everything. A few days later, Jack hosts a dinner party at their house, and Frank and Shelley also attend. While Alice is busy cooking, Frank approaches her and tells her that she intrigues him. He has always wanted someone to challenge him because great men can only make a difference in history if they are pushed. He hopes that Alice will continue to push him in the future. During dinner, Alice decides to sit at the head of the table instead of letting Jack take the spot because she wants to directly face Frank while they eat. When the usual small talk begins, Alice interrupts and asks the guests about their lives before coming to the town. She points out how the same few stories repeat among all the neighbors, and they are encouraged to remember these stories while forgetting the real ones, like what happened to Margaret. Jack tries to make Alice stop, but Frank urges her to continue. Everyone in the room feels extremely uncomfortable, and Shelley loses her temper. She calls Alice out for causing a scene, insulting her husband, and then she gets up and leaves. The other guests follow her out, and while Jack goes to open the door, Frank stays behind to express his disappointment in Alice before he also leaves. She insists they need to leave this place before it ruins their relationship. After much pleading, Jack finally agrees to run away together. Alice wastes no time and hurriedly packs the bare essentials before joining Jack in the car. Alice doesn't understand what's happening until the men in red appear and forcefully take her away, leaving Jack in tears as he hears his wife's cries for help. Alice is taken to the hospital and subjected to electroshock therapy. She starts experiencing visions of the couple again. She discovers that it's her and Jack, but they are living in modern times and hum the familiar but annoying song. In this new vision, Jack has lost his job, but Alice reassures him that she can take on extra shifts at the hospital where she works as a doctor. Eventually, Jack spends his night listening to Frank's podcast, which promotes a way for men to find their true selves away from societal constraints. Some time later, Alice wakes up again in the hospital in Victory. Collins announces that Alice has been fixed, so she is sent back to town and resumes her old routine as if nothing had happened. The days pass calmly until one evening when Jack comes home from work singing that annoying song again. It is then revealed that the Jack from Alice's visions is real, and he has applied to be part of the Victory Project where he can choose to have a perfect life. This allows him access to a special machine that he keeps at home, and Alice is connected to it 24/7 because her life in Victory is actually a simulation. This is the same for all the wives in town, and like the other men, Jack connects to the machine for a few hours each day before disconnecting when he enters the headquarters in the desert. The rest of the time, he takes care of Alice's real body and works at a low-paying job to afford the machine. Back in Victory, Alice collapses in pain, overwhelmed by the sudden flood of images in her mind. She demands an explanation from Jack, who becomes defensive and shouts that he did it to give them a perfect life because they were miserable before. Alice still feels angry, thinking he has taken away her independence and tried to convince her she is crazy. She also worries about the other wives and the children, but Jack quickly clarifies that the kids are not real, they are also part of the simulation. Tired of her husband's lies, Alice grabs a glass and uses it to knock Jack unconscious. What she doesn't know is that dying in the Victory simulation also means dying in real life. As the real Jack closes his eyes, Frank receives a phone call informing him of what has happened. At that moment, Bunny enters the house because she heard noises and quickly covers Jack's body before trying to calm Alice down. Alice attempts to explain everything, and Bunny confesses that she already knows. She chose the simulation because it's the only way she can have her deceased children back in her life. Bunny also explains that Alice needs to go to the headquarters and disconnect herself since Jack can no longer do it for her in the actual machine. Alice is afraid but follows Bunny's instructions. She discovers that all the neighbors are also coming out of their homes. As the street lights start exploding, the women begin to sense that something is wrong, but the men are focused on finding Jack and stopping Alice. Bunny steps in to push the men away, allowing Alice to get into a car and drive away just in time before the men in red arrive. A chase ensues through the streets, and although Alice manages to leave town without any trouble, things become more difficult in the desert when the men in red start ramming their cars into hers. Dr. Collins is also driving his own car, speeding up to help catch Alice. When Alice finds herself surrounded, she quickly maneuvers her car out of the way, causing Collins and the others to crash into each other. Frank receives the news of Collins' death at home during a phone call on speaker, so Shelley overhears what is happening too. Shelley approaches him and stabs him, declaring that it's her turn now. In the desert, Alice continues driving until she reaches the hill and follows the road with the car. However, the vehicle gets stuck on a sharp turn. Alice jumps out of the car and starts running, believing that the blocked car is enough to impede the others from following her. The men in red abandon their cars and begin climbing the hill to catch up with Alice. When she reaches the dome, Alice experiences a hallucination of Jack embracing her and pleading for her to stay. However, the men in red reappear behind her, reminding her of what she must do. Alice rushes to the wall and places her hands on the glass, throwing her head back as disturbing images flood her mind, mingling with memories of her true self. Suddenly, everything goes black, and Alice gasps.